Garrett Bradley, welcome to the Daily Social Distancing Show.
Thanks so much for having me here, man. I really appreciate it.
Um, you have been on quite the journey with your film. I mean, you're one of America's most documented and celebrated filmmakers. You have a specific style and a touch when you create a documentary. People feel through the message that you create in your films, and your new documentary film Time is no different. From winning you Best Director at Sundance to getting you nominated at the Oscars, which would make you, if you won, the first black woman ever to win an Oscar for directing. Um, it's a truly powerful story that I think crosses all boundaries of age and time and love and prison and punishment and forgiveness, etc. Let's go to the inception of the idea. Time, a story of Sybil Fox Richardson, a woman who is just trying to be reunited with her husband. Take me through the story and why you thought this would make a documentary that people should watch.
Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't like going after a specific story. I made a short film called Alone, which is a 13-minute op doc, and there was a real absence in talking about incarceration from a woman's point of view, from a family's point of view, from the point of view of the human experience. And I met Fox in the process of making that film. Um, I actually called this organization called FLIC, Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And Gina Womack, who's the co-founder and director of that organization, picked up and said, Lon has to speak to Fox. And so Fox is briefly in this short film and makes a really vivid connection between slavery and the prison industrial complex. And we developed a natural relationship, and I felt like when Alone came out into the world, it only further illuminated the absence of images and experiences that people could understand that were around, again, the effects of facts, the effects of incarceration.
What really struck me with this film is it didn't follow the narrative that I thought it would. So many of the stories I watch these days are generally about people who are wrongly incarcerated or people who got framed or something happened, but this was an interesting story that I feel is a lot more nuanced, because you take us through the journey of a couple who resorted to robbery. They were going through tough times, but they did commit a crime. And then Sybil, who we see in the film, is sentenced to 3 years in prison. Her husband, meanwhile, is sentenced to 60 years in prison. And that's an interesting subject to follow, because for one thing I've learned in America, and there are many countries in the world who follow that idea, is they go, well, if you commit a crime, you get punished and we punish you as much as possible. But here it feels like you're not trying to get over the fact that people committed the crime. You're asking us as the viewers to ask ourselves what our intention with the punishment should be. Why did you want that framing? Why did you want to question that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think people can look at anything from a political perspective, but I think that when you are forced to understand things from a human perspective, from a perspective that requires imagination, meaning one has to imagine themselves in a situation beyond one which they are already in, it becomes very obvious to me that the system needs to change, and that the value, if we think about human life having value, then, and actually, I was speaking with somebody this morning, and they made this really poignant connection to the pandemic, and that we've all experienced 1 year, right, of solitude, and 1 year of real change and not being with those that we love. And so if someone can imagine 6 decades of that, a sentence of 6 decades of that, is it worth it? How do we really value each other as human beings? And how do we think about the structure by which society is built, almost globally, as one that now needs to be based in forgiveness, based in the reality of humanity, that's the future, I hope. And I think that, I'm entering this conversation from that human perspective because I am a human, and that is how I connected with it.
Yeah, there's no denying when you look at criminal justice, that one of the biggest things you have to hope for if you're ever ensnared within the criminal justice system is you have to pray and hope that the person who is sentencing you sees some potential in you as a human being, because then that could determine whether or not you have a second chance. What makes this documentary particularly gripping is you're not just telling a story, you're showing us the story. We get to live the life of a woman who is waiting decades for her husband to come home to be a father. And what's really interesting is you have this footage, something that you would never normally have, is she was basically documenting her life, and you put this all together and then created the story around it. I mean, that must have been a goldmine for you, discovering a subject where they've been filming themselves for decades.
Yeah, it was a gold mine. I mean, I think to be totally honest with you, having shot this film without any awareness of its existence until our last day of filming, and I'll never forget, I said to Fox, I'll be back in a few months and I'll share a cut with you. And she handed me this little black bag that ended up being 100 hours of her own home
Wow.
archive. And so, in that moment, it's like your worst nightmare and it's your dream come true same time, and I think that, you don't, even though you understand in that moment that that the structure, right, the length of it is likely going to change. Like, I knew right away it's probably not going to be a 13-minute documentary anymore.
Right.
So we knew those things were going to change. Gabe Rhodes, who cut the film, we knew those things were going to be required. But the intention, the reason for why I wanted to make the film, the reason by which myself and Fox and the family agreed to come together in an effort to make this was not going to change, and I feel like that is really important especially when you're making documentaries, when you don't really have, it's a real honoring of the present moment. It almost becomes unethical to try to anticipate an ending, to try to control anything. So the thing that's guiding you is your intention. Your intention is the thing that tells you what to shoot and how to shoot it, and I don't think that changes even in the edit.
This is not your first documentary film about love and prison, and I wonder if you choose this particularly because it's such a difficult subject, or if you feel that it's a subject that isn't understood enough. Because oftentimes, as society, we're conditioned to believe that once a person is a prisoner or imprisoned, they're no longer a human and they're ostracized from society. That is their punishment. But you make films that make us see them as human beings who have either made a mistake or have committed a crime, willingly and willfully, but we still are forced to see them as human beings. Why are you trying to do that? What are you trying to evoke in us as the viewers who are watching, a movie like this? Are you trying to make us feel sad? Are you trying to make us rethink prison as a concept? Because it is a complicated thing to observe as a viewer.
I mean, I think filmmaking is, at its heart, the purpose of it is for human beings to better understand themselves, for us to understand ourselves, for us to understand the world that we're living in. It's kind of as simple as that, and of course all these other layers have grown since its inception, but it's still a relatively young medium. And I think the spirit of that is part of what drew me to it at a young age. I was curious. I've always been a curious person. I've always been really interested in people, and it's a tool for being able to do that. Empathy and being able to understand each other is fundamentally what motivates everything that I do, and it's an integral part of making films.
Well, it's something that I feel like you master time and time again, and just seeing this story being told, I think will touch everybody. Congratulations on your victories thus far, and good luck for the Oscars. I hope you take it, and I hope you make history in the process. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Trevor. Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate you.